Yeah. Good afternoon, Savannah, and the back of Albany, and Augusta, and hello, Athens. So this is our last time we meet, other than the final exam. The final exam in Athens, you will have the TA proctoring. What I wanted to do today is to use this opportunity for you guys to ask questions, and I can try to answer those to my capability. Or other clarifications or other housekeeping gems, and if you're an existing site, just speak up.
How the exam is going to be new material and how much is from the old stuff?
Okay, so that's a good question. What's the distribution between new material and old material? So I had envisioned this perfect scenario where I could do 50-50, and then I started writing questions, and it was like, there's no way I'm going to get to an even distribution. It's just not possible given the amount of lectures with more intense content that we've had in the second half. And so when I'm writing the questions and I'm looking at it, it's about a 65% new material, 35% older material, could even shift a little bit to 70-30, and I know that this isn't ideally, I guess, what the administration had envisioned when they wanted us to do cumulative final, but I guess it's really just based on the amount of content and what is available for assessing your knowledge in terms of, we just had a lot more in the second part than the first part. And so that's kind of the rationale behind it. So the way that I'm looking at the questions now, it's definitely skewed more towards the more recent material that you haven't yet seen versus the content that was on your midterm exam. Yes, question in the back in Athens. No, I won't be using any questions from the debate. So the debate I see is just a separate assignment, and the same thing with the drug gene pairs as a separate assignment. And that's for you guys to sort of pull this information together, and also because ACPE wants you guys to recognize some of the social and economical issues that impact pharmacogenomics in the clinic. But I'm not going to write specific questions based upon that content. Now, having said that, if there was a drug gene pair that was relevant to a previous lecture, you'll see that for sure, but you're expecting that, so I think that goes without saying. Yeah, question in the back in Athens.
So, will we have any questions similar to that one assignment we had post-class where you gave us like a patient's genes and we like match it to the cancer that they're most likely to have?
Okay, so not to that extent, meaning that was a whole distribution or a table of different genetics and then asking you to come up with the diagnosis. But what you will see are haplotypes, diplotypes, genotypes that ask you to describe information that would reflect that. But I think you guys are expecting that, to be given diplotypes and ask to interpret that information as far as how would the drug dosing change, or what drug is that patient eligible for given the mutation that they have. So that certainly you're asked to put together, but again, I think you guys are expecting that. I think your question is more towards like just the bulk of that assignment in terms of being given 6 different patient profiles of genetic mutations and then trying to assemble those to what have I got here and how do I treat them. And the idea of that assignment, again, was to get you to work with the information I'm pulling together, knowing that that's probably the hardest thing that I could give you guys at this stage, but then allow you to freely use the internet to try to sort of determine what you have. And you're not going to get access to the internet on the exam. So yeah, I think something that big would be unreasonable. And some students thought that that assignment was pretty easy, and I know that others of you have said that it seemed really hard and overwhelming. And so, I know that I have 3 hours, but I don't expect the exam to last 3 hours. I would say on average, students would be here 45 minutes to an hour. That's just an average. If you're the type that wants to sit and look through and double, triple check, that's obviously fine. You have the right to do that. But I would say on average, students leave pretty early. So something like that would probably take a while. Yeah, question in the back in Athens. So that's a good question. So what's the format of the exam? So far it's all multiple choice. And I would probably stick to that formatting. I don't expect that to change. I know in your midterm you had a couple of maybe fill in the blanks. I don't anticipate doing that on the final. I'm not going to ask you to spell out names of drugs or conditions or diseases. That just got way too complicated with what my intention was and then how it actually worked out. I wasn't happy with that question that I wrote. And so I'm not going to put anything like that on the final. It's just going to be multiple choice. Now, having said that, some of your multiple choice, as you guys kind of know my style, will have 8 different possibilities, listed. So I don't just do A, B, C, D, because I can do as many as I want with ExamSoft. So sometimes I max that out and I get a little carried away, and you might have one answer to select. And then you've seen questions where I'll say choose all that applies. So you may have 9 different choices, maybe 2 are relevant, or maybe 3 are relevant. I try to give information when I write questions like that to say choose all that apply or choose to. So read underneath the question to make sure that you are aware of that. Like sometimes it's in bold or sometimes there's a notation there. But there's no matching like A, B, C, D, like lettering matching up to something. There are a couple of problems where I'm asking you to give me information and your answer is multiple choice, but you have to do a little like figuring out matching or filling in the blank and getting that order right before you select your answer choice. So that's where I would encourage you to use that scratch paper, write it out, say, okay, this means this means this. Okay, so therefore now I have my answers. I'm gonna look at the choices, and that means it's A or it's C or it's D, right? So you have to do a little bit of thinking and work to match those up before you choose that multiple choice answer, but that's as close as I get to matching as possible. Just trying to make sure I comprehensively answered that question. So there's no fill in the blanks. It's all multiple choice, but there could be like matching information that you need to solve before you go through that. And sometimes I have multiple answers, but I try to denote that when I do. Sometimes those answers are partial credit. Sometimes they're, you have to get them all right. I try to mix that up between partial credit and all right. So that's just randomly distributed throughout. Other questions? Yes, question in Athens.
So with the genetic tests, do you expect us to know the specific brand names of various tests and things like that?
So I struggled with that this year because last year there were very specific brand names of tests as a companion diagnostic to specific drugs. So this year I did include a couple of questions like that, but I think from here on out I may stop that altogether after this year, just because the market is being flooded with different types of tests. So for now, yes. And the reason for that is that when ACPE looked at pharmacy education, they wanted the pharmacy students to come out of here with some specific tests and have some knowledge about what tests would I use to run to get this information. And when we used to have a very small pool of companion diagnostics, I think that makes sense. But I've seen an exponential increase in this, and so I think there's going to be so many different companies doing this that eventually I don't think it's going to matter. But that's a very important question for this year, because when you look at your lectures like non-small cell lung cancer or melanoma, you see very specific brand names of tests to say, if you're running this specific test in non-small cell lung cancer, you're looking at either this drug or this drug. And then you have a completely different brand name companion diagnostic test to look at 2 other drugs. And so they're all sort of broken up into the companion diagnostic that that specific company wants for their drug. Again, eventually, I don't think it's going to matter. Eventually, I think you're going to have like one test or some kind of impact testing that does 400 different things. It just makes more sense to do it that way than to sort of piecemeal all the different genetic tests for a tumor specimen. So this year, yes. So when you are studying, pay close attention to, okay, if I have this brand name test that is specifically looking at this gene, and I think there's a handful of those. Again, I know it's in non-small cell lung cancer. I believe it's in melanoma. Breast cancer has some in terms of what is the outcome of treating that patient. Some very specific tests, but that's a little different than drug with companion diagnostic. So yes, make sure you look at the specific brand names of your companion diagnostic tests.
Dr. Murray,
Yes.
did you mention how many questions would be on the test?
So I'm still writing questions right now. I think there's 78, and I'm starting to run out. That sounds like a lot.
It is.
So you think about it. We have all semesters material. I know we have classes where it doesn't count, but if you think it anywhere from 4 to 7 questions per lecture, it just kind of adds up, right? We have at least 10 lectures or more of content. And so, and I know students usually say they don't want that many questions, but hindsight is always better. And then looking back, they're like, I wish we had more questions because then the point value would have been reduced and I would have done better. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. So I look at it as the more questions is to your advantage, not your disadvantage. Also to complement your studying. Like I know sometimes students get frustrated when they say, I studied this part so much and you didn't ask any questions about that. So I'm trying to make sure I'm covering things to make your studying worthwhile so you're not wasting your time. And I don't know exactly what part of that you might need in your clinic or your rotations at some point. But I think I'm teetering out. So right now I have 78. That's more than double what you had on your midterm. So I don't expect too many more. I'm not going to reach 100. There's no way. I'm like out of content. I'm not out of content, but I'm not going to reach 100. But even so, so last year there were like 65 questions and students were out of here in 30 minutes. So I felt like I wrote a lot of questions, and not all of your multiple choice questions, again, are going to have 8 answers. Like some of them may have yes or no, or like true or false style, but not true or false. So you may look at it and say, oh, that's easy, and then next one. So you might not be spending that long on a question. So right now 78. I would anticipate 80-ish.
I see, thank you.
Since this is on exams, and it's all multiple choice, will we be getting the exam immediately after we finish?
Yes, because there's no fill in the blanks. Unless, as a class, you told me you don't want to see your grade. I mean, I usually do that for your benefits, so that you can start like calculating. But if you like that, okay, all right, okay. Maybe I'm just hearing from the surprise students, like I wasn't expecting that, I didn't want to see that grade. Well, eventually you're going to see the grades. So, if, all it is for me is like a couple of check boxes and I can do it. The only time I don't like doing it is if there's a bunch of fill in the blanks or response questions, because then you have to type in my keystrokes, or it looks like you didn't perform as well as you performed. In this case, it's all multiple choice, so it makes sense to do that. And then the only thing that could change is if I write a disastrous question that needs to be thrown out or made bonus, and then your score could change a little bit. But pending something like that happening, it would be close or reflective of what you got. So yes, we'll do that. I obviously haven't pushed the exam yet. I wanted to have this review section and make sure everything I have in my mind and everything there is in order before I send it on. And again, I'm writing a little bit more content right now too. So yes, you'll have an idea of your score. And then pending the TA having graded your assignments, you should, at that point, by next Monday, have a really good idea where you stand. Just as a note, I will be out of the country for 2 weeks, and so if you try to contact me, or if you're in crisis about a question or your test or your grade, I'm not going to be immediately responsive. Having said that, we can meet when I get back, discuss, review, whatever your concern is. I can still make alterations to grades and everything like that, so all I'm saying is don't panic, right? If I make, have ever had this happen, but if I make a miscalculation in your grade and you're panicked, we can change it, we can fix it. If you can't get a hold of me immediately, it's because I'm in a different time zone, and maybe I'll have access to email, but I'll come back and we'll settle it then.
Is it safe to assume that the lectures that were not on the midterm will also not be on the final?
Exactly. Yep. If they were on the midterm, you won't see them on the final. So that was like the course introduction, direct-to-consumer test, superhero, SNPs, super tasting genetics. Those things will not be on the final exam. Those are more in-class exercises. There's really no way for me to test that material, and I don't think there's any point in doing that. The use of pharmacogenomic databases, what I consider one of the most important classes of the semester. I can't test on that easily on final exam, so using PharmGKB, CPIC guidelines, I'm hoping at this point you guys have that down, you know these resources, you can use them, but that won't be on the final either. So on the final are, fundamentals of human genetics, which are basically definitions about pharmacogenomics, the cholesterol, lipid metabolism lecture, CYP 2C19 lecture, CYP 2D6, the anticoagulants, warfarin, and the HLA genetics. So there's like 6 or 7 lectures that were on the midterm out of the 15 class periods that we had. All right, question in the back in Athens. Since the midterm, are all the lectures going to be on the exam? The lectures, yes. If they were like exercises in class, for example, like Tony, the patient, and the write-up about how you would counsel, like genetic counseling, that's not on the exam. Like that was an in-class activity, just like the debates, drug gene pairs, cancer of unknown primary, so that exercise that was referenced to earlier, like that's not what I would consider testable material for the final exam.
Will the project grades be in before the final?
I hope so. I don't know. I have to ask the TA where she's at.
No, well, she said assignment, so that's not the same as a project.
Okay, but how do we think ones are assigned?
Just make them combine the
I will say, when I was
23%
looking
and
at
30 and
the
just do it out of 30%.
debate materials, make sure that groups have uploaded the materials that they used in addition to your PowerPoint slide. I saw some groups had the PowerPoint slide, but she's also going to be looking for the materials that you used to prepare. So just put those up, what you got. So I hope she will have those done, but grades aren't due, I think, until the following week. So she's got another week if she needs it.
Do you mean references or the actual documents? What do you mean?
So you can do either or both. What she's going to be looking for is material that you use to prepare your group for the topic. Just some sort of level of evidence that you guys did, a bit of research, you organized the material, looked up references, that kind of information.
So what, do you have to do something?
Dr. Murphy, do you mind reviewing again? A couple of us in the Augusta campus completed the direct-to-consumer genomics testing, and so we completed it by the first deadline, but then we also did all of the projects. So how will that bonus be factored into our grade?
So the way I had the direct-to-consumers extra optional activity was that it could either substitute for your direct gene pair participation or substitute for the debate participation. But in lieu of that, let's say you did that, then it can substitute for any other like quiz, in-class activity up to 4% of the grade. Now why 4%? Because if you opted out of the activity, it's roughly approximate to that percentage of the grade. So I tried to make it equivalent, but still gave you the option of replacing it for something else. So since this is a pilot year, I know I did a terrible job in having the students specify what they were opting to do with that optional assignment. And in my head, the way it was going to work was like, well, if I see the optional assignment and I see something missing, then I'll know to substitute that and plug it in. I mean, it's pretty logical, right? They're missing something and they did this and there it is. So that's the way I had anticipated doing it. Now I know if I do it next year, I need to have the students specify, but I was just going to do it to the best of their advantage. So if they're missing an assignment, I would assume, okay, they meant to substitute that. Now, if all the assignments are there, then I could substitute it for the lowest grade that they have on any other assignment. And I was gonna kind of go in that order, that hierarchy, meaning if I don't see a grade or participation for drug gene pairs or the debates, it would go in there. If I see that they were absent or missed a quiz or didn't turn in a grade, then I would plug it in there. And then if I see everything's done, I'm like, okay, well, where's their lowest grade? And then plug it in there for credit. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
And I know that some of you have emailed me and said, you didn't ask, but I want to specify, I want to use it for this. So next year, I just need to make a place where students can just specify. The only other thing I guess I can add to that is that some of the students did alpha genomics, and our results for alpha genomics came back really quickly, but by the time they came back was like the day the assignment was due, or the day of, or the day before the assignment was due. And so some of you guys reached out to me and said, I did the alpha genomics, is it too late? No, you can still upload that. Like, I was part of that, I know when the results came in. It just, I guess once everything got organized, like it was pretty late in the semester, but their turnaround was impressively fast. And the results were really fantastic. So you can still upload that. I was really happy with that test. I'm not happy with the price point, but it was good. It was a good test for pharmacogenomics for sure. Other questions? Questions about content?
What about
brand versus generic on the drugs? Like, say, I know we all know warfarin and Coumadin, but something more obscure like cancer drug, we need to know like both brand and generic.
With the cancer drugs, generic is more likely. I'm more likely to use generic. What I try to do is insert both, like nivolumab, then parentheses Opdivo. So I tried to do that for the cancer drugs. Now that I'm thinking in my head, there were a couple of places where I just said 5-fluorouracil, or capecitabine, or 6-mercaptopurine, azathioprine, thiobronine. Like there were some lectures where the drugs are just in generic name on the slides everywhere. And so if I did insert the brand name, I'd have to go look up like, okay, Ronatecan, Campostar for each one. And a lot of those are older drugs. So I didn't do that for some of the cancer drugs. The newer drugs, I always try to include both because, I feel like when they're newer, they're used interchangeably, and you see the commercials where they're just talking about Opdivo and so forth, but I'm trying to think of other examples. I'm pretty certain for the newer drugs I have both. But older drugs, the cancer drugs, generics, because the generics are what's on the slides.
I have a question in Savannah about, is there any way that you could format ELC to show us what our grade is going to be going into the final, or like at least what it is right now? Because right now they're all kind of just listed, and it's kind of hard to calculate out of the different points, and like, yeah, is there any way for you to do that in ELC to make it easier for us?
So one thing I'm thinking of is I did get an inquiry into, what's an in-class activity, what's a quiz, and so I did start making up a table to sort of go through and delineate those for the assignments. So I could post that. It's going to be hard for me to try to calculate your grade going into the final if the TA hasn't yet finished the grading. So that could be unfairly distributed. So what I mean is if she's finished the grading for certain students and not others, like if she's still in process, some people would have it, some people wouldn't. But if I post a table, you could estimate it. You could kind of have an idea, okay, well this was a quiz, this was an in-class activity, if that makes sense. So let me put that on my to-do list to do that, and that might help.
Thank you.
Yes, question in the back in Athens.
So on the syllabus, it says that assignments in class are 60%, and then quizzes and other in-class times are 21%. How do we know which one's which, or is it just one big assignment class?
Literally what?
So I think that's, yeah. So that's what I'll post so that you'll clearly see where I'm going with that. To make that more clear, because sometimes an in-class assignment isn't necessarily a quiz, but I have it, so that's what I'll post. I'll get that organized, and then that'll make more sense to you. So you guys can try to calculate where you're at. Having said that, I would think that you want to do as well as you can on the final, because you're going to need this information in the clinic. And when your family members call you up because you're the health professional in the family and they have questions. But I will strive to add clarity to the grading scheme.
My grandma always calls
so you guys can estimate where you're at.
sorry, I also wanted to ask if there were any extra grades, like assignments still outstanding aside from the, the projects. Just because this is from group 11, I think we spoke to you about this before, but we still have one assignment with 0 that you said something the TA might have still been working on, but let's check if it's still listed as 0.
Okay,
Like the combination.
can you
Valsartan
send
losartan.
myself and the TA a follow-up email about that?
Either
Because
one,
if
not
it's, I think initially when you sent the email, it was a brand new assignment, and I know she hadn't gotten to it, but if she hasn't gotten to it by this point, I just need to just gently remind her that you guys are waiting on those grades and that it needs to move higher up to the priority list of the tasks that she's working on.
Thank you. I just want to make sure it didn't get like overlooked before the end of the semester. And what is the TA's email listed on the syllabus?
Yes, but it's also, I'll give it to you right now, but it's on the syllabus, SKUPPA. And then of course at uga.edu, so SKUPPA.
Thank you.
Well, one good sign is that so far all the questions have been about logistics and grading and not content focused. So judging from the fact that you guys are third years, that at this point you probably have like really good study methods and techniques and content, you've got that. You're just sort of trying to manage your time and how long to study and how much to study and what areas to focus on. So hopefully that's a good indication of where you're at, and hopefully that's also an indication that you're retaining this material, because the whole idea of the administration wanting the third year course coordinators to do comprehensive exams was the fear of like this pump and dump, like you're studying for an exam and then you forget it, where we want you to take this into the clinic. And so I'm gauging that that's a good sign. Yes, question in the back.
Is it possible for us to see the past quizzes, like the answers and everything?
Yes. Let me put that on my to-do list. I had tried to uncover those. I know we talked about this before, so I had tried to uncover those as the quizzes were being taken. Obviously, there are some that I did not, so I need to go back and take a look at that and fix those. My rationale is that if I uncover them before everybody's finished taking the quiz, that those who are done can then see the answers, and not that there would be any cross-communication, but it just prevents any opportunity for that. I mean, there probably wouldn't be, but it's just an extra layer. And so I need to make sure everybody's taken the quiz and then the answers are uncovered. Obviously at this point, that's perfectly reasonable. So it's just one of the reasons why it's on delay and not like instant. And there's no option for me to say, okay, delay it for a day and then release it. It's like just delay it or show it. It's just a either or option in ELC. So I'll fix that. Other questions about logistics or content? we still have 15 more minutes of class. If you have additional content questions or logistics, if not, we can say goodbye and call it a day and meet again next Monday for the final.
Huh? You don't want to?
Yeah.
I don't. We have to.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Been a great class.